I'm here.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Brilliant to see you. Aloha.
Thank
We're
you.
lucky to be in Jim's presence, and I think we'll just go straight into it. I remember when I was a student in 1976, one of the papers you talked about was the imagination of the future in Japan, and your second piece I remember was about the Bushido ethic. So if you could go back in time before we go forward in terms of talking about Asia-Pacific futures.
Well, I'm not very good at thinking about the past, but I must admit, one of the attributes of being older is you do spend some time thinking about what you did and didn't do. It's certainly one of the most transformative events of my life was taking a job, my very first teaching job, with a brand new PhD from the American University in Washington in political science, taking a job at a law school, in a new law school in an established university, Rikyo Daigaku, Rikyo University in Tokyo, and living there for 6 years, teaching in, well, I called it Japanese. I'm not sure what my students made of it, but between some English and some Japanese, we seemed to communicate pretty well. And so I learned so many things. You mentioned two. One was I went to Japan for many reasons, but one was to see why that country at that time in the 1960s, specifically from 66 to 60 to 66, had modernized so quickly, so in a sense effortlessly from what had been considered to be a feudal country to a completely modern country in almost a decade, and then certainly an imperialist country following what other countries were doing. That's what you did to be a major country. I learned that there was a relationship between fundamental values, culture, and technology. And one of the things that interested me is how hard Japanese worked at doing things that Westerners thought they were pretty good at, and how quickly they were able to understand the way Western technology worked and adapt it for their own purposes in order to become a dominant power in basically 10 years. And I got a grant from the American Council of Learned Societies that let me do a survey in Tokyo. I replicated a study that had been done called the religious factor, replicating Max Weber's notion of the Protestant ethic, and concluded that Japan had an equivalent, a functional equivalent of the Protestant ethic. And I wrote a paper that was relatively influential called The Protestant Ethic in Japan. So the point was, Japan was modern before Perry showed up with modern technology. It already had almost all the attributes of what we considered to be a modern country at that time, except the technology, but they had the ability to understand the technology and the social and economic things around it to move forward. So that was one of the things I learned there.
That's fantastic. I have with you before someone jumps in. So if we now go fast forward a bit, in terms of Asia-Pacific futures, can you say something about your work, either Hawaii 2000, and I know you've done work in the actual Pacific Islands. How were you able to spread foresight and futures in the region? And what were the key factors?
First of all, I think you need to appreciate the fact that the second meeting of the World Future Studies Federation was held in Kyoto, so that we had a presence in Asia from the very beginning. And there were people from all of the Asian countries, including some of the Pacific Islands, in that conference in 1970. So it's not exactly something new you guys have done. You have revised something that had been not fully networked and brought forward. So it's a long story as to why Hawaii 2000 happened, but I have a book from Hawaii 2000, a rather thick book, you can see, of an event that happened in 1969, 1970, in which the citizens look ahead. Well, there happened to be a person from Malaysia. Well, first of all, I'll say this was sold in bookstores at the airport. Can you imagine buying this kind of a book in an airport bookstore now? No. But a person from Malaysia picked it up and said, let's do Malaysia 2001. Let's get ahead of Hawaii and the United States. And here's that book from that. And there were incredible people there, both from Malaysia, but Buckminster Fuller, Herman Kahn, Alvin Toffler, John McHale, you name it. Fantastic people attended this conference in 76, 75. So Hawaii 2000 had that immediate impact in Malaysia. And while Malaysia developed in its own way, not necessarily the way we envisioned here, nonetheless, I think it probably was one of the seeds of the very future orientation that Malaysia has had.
Thank you, Jim. Let me pass it on to Sung Won. He's just a student from the 90s. My era ended in the 80s. So
it never ends. It never
ends. It never
Thank
ends.
you, Jim.
Hello, Dr. Dator.
Good to see you.
I remember the first time I, as a journalist, met Dr. Dator when he came to Seoul, Korea in 2006, 15 years ago. A few hours before I met Jim, I saw the daily horoscopes that a newspaper offered. My horoscope or fortunes is set by the year I was born, and the fortune of the day came out like this. I will meet a very, very important person in my life today. I never read any fortune since I studied future studies, but the fortune I saw then accurately predicted my future. Okay, my question is that you have visited both South and North Korea. I haven't been to North Korea yet. When forecasting the future of East Asia, we cannot help thinking about the future of the Korean Peninsula and the future of two Koreas. What do you think the future of the two Koreas and the further East Asia should be in the future?
Well, I think one of the major things I would say, and I've been saying it to Koreans and to others in Asia, is the American century is over. We have done our damage and we've done whatever we could do good. That's fine. So it's now your turn, your opportunity to step out of the shadow and become dominant, predominant in the future of determining the future of Asia. So I don't feel I should tell you what you should do specifically, other than you have the ability, you in Korea and elsewhere in the region, all over the region, have the ability to find a new path. And it's desperately important to find a new path. I'm just so upset with the United States wanting to pick a war with China. China doesn't want to fight, and we don't want to fight them. So let's just forget that. And it would not be a pleasant fight from Korea's point of view either. I am convinced that North and South Korea will join peacefully if they're not goaded into conflict by American or outside ventures. So it's in your hands. And I know those are good hands.
Yeah, I understand that. So I'll also emphasize on decolonizing the future.
That's
so
right.
When I met Johan Galtung a few years ago, he said to me that Norway and Sweden fought for 700 years, but now they coexist peacefully. So the future of the Korean Peninsula that I envision is similar to Sweden and Norway. My second question is that I received many lessons from you at the University of Hawaii from 2007 to 2012. One of the important lessons I learned from you is that you forecast the future with a very mathematical and objective distance. You do not lean toward any ideology, but you consider various global trends, emerging issues, and arguments in a very balanced approach. You have been teaching future studies for over 50 years, and you are also teaching future studies at KAIST in Korea since 2013. you published a book called Advancing Futures, which compiled the experiences of scholar teaching future studies around the world. So how do you think futurists should teach future studies to young people?
Well, I'm going to pick up what you said at the outset. I would describe what you said as the alternative futures approach that I take. That most people are focused on one future, variations of one future. Most people are focused on growth, continued economic growth. But there are other people who see the world very differently. That's one of the first things I learned. I started out as a high-tech futurist, no doubt about it. But as I began to look around, I saw many other people had completely different, often opposite. And I don't know whether it's a virtue or a weakness of mine, but I just, yeah, that makes sense. Oh, yeah, that makes sense too. Well, wait, I understand. So that each one of them have a logic to their view of the future. And as a bleeding heart liberal, I can't say, well, I'm right. My view is right and yours is wrong. Rather, as a teacher, I have to try to share with everyone the different views of the future so that people can develop their own views and work with people with different views in order to achieve a common future that is actually satisfying as much as possible to everyone involved.
Wonderful. You also share your insight and wisdom to us. Thank you. I hand over to my beloved friend, John.
Thank you so much, Songwon. It's a joy beyond words to be part of this experience. And Jim, a pleasure to see you. I think the immense gratitude I feel in being your student is precisely what Songwon was drawing out, is that you teach not just, of course, what to think, but emphasize how to think. And I will say that actually it was that drew me and brought me into the space. So I was reading Nietzsche in Kapiolani Park, as one does in Hawaii, and the person who I was meeting had this paper, Loose Connections, by this Dator guy. And next thing I know, I was in your office and I applied to the PhD program. And I wanted to specifically mention that because that article was quite formative in my own experience learning from you, but really introduces your theory of change. And of course, you're very well known for this emphasis on having a theory of change and emphasizing the necessity of that within the context of doing futures work. And yet that's not something that is often articulated. Of course, there's a theory of change in the development space is a bit different. I'm wondering, could you maybe speak then to what you've seen shift and evolve within the context of futures work over the decades that you've been doing it? Either what you think is working well or what you think isn't working well. Where are the gaps? Where have you seen the evolution of the field go over the course of your time in it?
Well, I don't know whether it's evolution. One of the things that Sohail has done is make me be more respectful of cycles than I used to do. That's another virtue of age. I don't see things going anywhere. I just sort of see them going. And so I don't know whether the field has progressed or not. It could be a spiral progression, but it sort of goes up and down. And at the present time, it's sort of in an up situation. I have always said that the time futurists are in biggest demand is when the world's falling apart. And when all else fails, consult a futurist, and they can tell you something hopeful about the future. But don't talk to me in that case if you want to give you a Panglossian view. But obviously there is hope and the rest. But I do think that we are beginning to make progress. The existence of this organization with as many people as there are online and in the APF in general, I'm very impressed by the Association of Professional Futurists in their online comments, their willingness to share, their ability to share with electronic communication, which was not possible before. So I do see, and the demand, the need for useful information about the future is great. People still want us to say a sooth, to predict the future. And that we cannot do. I have to fall back on my four futures or something similar to that. And I see more and more people willing to consider that as well.
Great, thanks so much, Jim. One last quick question before we open it up, and that's, of course, the question that I think each of your students has to take to heart, and that is the question around what's next. I'd love to frame that a little bit within the context of the sort of the post-normal tendencies that you know that I have, which is, what is it, and of course not asking you to forecast, what is it you think that most people are missing or not seeing at this moment? What is it, everyone's sort of looking right with COVID, but you have a great tendency to look left. So what is it that you're looking at that maybe you think others aren't giving enough time or attention or do notice?
Again, thank you for asking that, because you're asking me what's really on my mind right now, what I would be doing if I weren't here with you. And that is, I think while there's still tremendous interest in identity, in saying I am not, people don't respect me, that Black lives don't matter, women are still oppressed, all of this identity, I see a whole new movement of people moving beyond identity who say, I don't want the identity given to me. I want to have my own. So I see a fluidity in identity. The term that I've used for many years that I learned from Buckminster Fuller is I'm not a human being, I'm a human becoming. And I am looking more and more of evidence of people becoming, wanting to become something else than what society has had. This fluidity, I think, is really fantastic. And this is including queer, gender, transsexual, trans-ethnic people who say, I don't care if I'm not an Indian by blood or by culture, I think I am and I want to be one. And it's causing a real change in people's thinking about what it is to be a human being and what your self is, if there is such a thing as a self. I look back, Sohail can look back and see somehow there's been a Jim Dator, there's been a Sohail. But boy, I'm both the same and completely different. And I'm really looking forward to what's next.
Can we then use
Thanks so much, Jim.
Sorry, John. Can we use that for our last 9 minutes together? What would you say is both the same and different as we think about the futures of the region? So
you actually me?
Yeah, Jim. Yeah, you're on for the next 9 minutes, Jim.
No, the next 9 minutes. Oh, great. Okay. Well, I think one of them is that America is not as dominant, and that's good. On the other hand, well, so let me put it this way. Among the things that concern me are obviously the global climate change, and I think that is the most important factor that is not being well considered. As you well know, it's been part of my futures from the very beginning, from the 1970s. It was something we could have done something about now. Now we have to deal with it. And I think that that's not being adequately expressed. I think there's a lot of focus on artificial intelligence and artificial life and all of the goods and bad things of that. And one way of looking at the problems of climate change and the rest is that we won't have the money or time to focus on developing all this high-tech stuff. It's going to be basic survival. On the other hand, the way I look at it, we're going to need all the intelligence and hard work we can get to solve the problem, and AI can help us solve these environmental problems potentially. But one of the other things that is of a short range, immediate interest is at the very time we need to be global in our work and thinking, all nations are becoming nationalistic. They're all turning inward. Fundamentally, there's no difference between Trump and Biden when it comes to the worldview, to the notion of it's still America first. It's still economic growth first. It's just done with in a very polite way, whereas it wasn't very polite under Trump. But the message is pretty much the same. And as I look around the world, everywhere, I see nationalism, a form of nationalism, and that then gets back to the fluid gender, the fluid self thing again. A lot with all this trend towards fluidity, there is also a trend towards rigidity. And so these are the tensions that I think will drive not just the Asia-Pacific area, but the globe as a whole.
So the tension between contradiction, fluidity, rigidity, I am versus I am becoming, that starts to set up the next wave. So Juan and John, anything else you want to ask before we ask the other 100 participants if they wish to ask something? And if you do, be very focused because we do end in 6 minutes. So Juan, John,
very targeted question. Yeah, very targeted question. Jim, as you know, I was the last PhD that you directed, and it was pretty close, right up to the end. So you've had students and have educated futurists for decades. What is the PhD that no one ever wrote that you wish someone had written? What's the doctoral dissertation?
Well, okay, I can answer that easily because I taught graduate and undergraduate classes on government design, and not a single one of you suckers would write a dissertation on that. I ought to be in engineering where I can make my students research for their PhDs on what I want. But no, none of you did that. The closest was Kaipo. Kaipo did one on how to design a constitutional convention to write a new quote constitution. But boy, if there's one thing we need, perhaps over everything else, that's new forms of governance. Our forms are so obsolete. They are a major source of conflict because they require us to have one group of people that know the answers to everything and another group of people who say, no, you don't, I know the answer to everything, and the inability to cooperate. That's built into the structure. And there's so many other old 17th century inequalities in our government structures. So it's not your fault, it's my fault. I could never get you guys to do that.
Sungwon, any last question? Go ahead. Sungwon.
Yeah, just quick question. Dr. Dator, could you share with us your emerging and ridiculous issue?
Well, I sort of did. One of the things that John was going to ask me, and so I think it'll fit, was the question of, let's see, what do most people think never could happen? Mm-hmm. And I have an answer to that, and it's an answer that you've heard me express because I was inspired by Glenn Page in his work on non-killing. I believe a non-killing world is possible. And he has written extensively, and he has scholars from all over the world, and Les Sponzel in anthropology in our university here has just sent me today yet another treatise on how a non-killing world is possible. And yet no one believes that it's possible. It is. You first start by believing it's worthwhile. If we didn't have, this is government killing. It'd be nice not to have anybody killing, but at least the government doesn't have the right to kill. And so that would be the first thing, that you believe that would be good. And second, you have to believe it's possible and then do the research to discover why, if or not it's possible. And he's produced plenty of evidence, in my opinion, that says it is. So that still remains my dream.
So
thank you.
Global constitution, or at least Asia constitution, with the first part of it, government should not kill. That would be definitely a step forward. Understood correctly.
First step.
Anyone else from anyone who's in the room wish to ask a question?
So they're all on mute, actually. So
you can write in the chat.
But Suzanne has one question, I think, and she can speak actually because she's on the panel.
Yeah. Well, it's a great pleasure to meet you, Jim. We read so much about you. We're greatly inspired by many of your students. One question I have for you: what is your biggest frustration right now with futurists and future?
I don't get frustrated easily, so I don't know that I have one. I think people. I'm not a wizard. I'm not a god. I don't know everything. I've been around. I've got a lot of misconceptions, no doubt, that I hold firmly. So I'm not frustrated by what's happening. I see people actually being reflective, just as there are many people that are not. I do wish people would take more seriously the normalization, let me put it that way, of the United States, that we're becoming an ordinary nation. We're going to be like the ones you mentioned, someone of the small nation. We're just going to be an ordinary nation in the mix of the rest. We're not going to vanish. But we're not going to have the sort of power and influence we had before. And so you're on your own. You're all on your own. Now that mommy and daddy's not beating you with whips, you're going to be able to find your own way. So do it.
So it's basically
now is the chance.
The need to find self-responsibility and become an actor and have agency as an individual, all of us, and as a community. And that's still missing, right?
I agreed. That is definitely what's right. That there's no reason anymore you can't do things on the global stage. So it's up to you.
Thanks so much, Jim. Last point, the tension, and really quick, is some futurism is ideological. Here's what it should be like. And then your approach has been being in the present of who you're with and allowing that future to emerge. Can you talk about that tension in terms of that's something all of us are faced with all the time?
Explain that again. I didn't get the main point.
You've framed it as, well, here's what you should do, versus your approach has been letting futurists find their way. Well,
again, I'm not sure that's a weakness or a strength, because I am not able to tell other people what to do. I am a bad parent that way because I don't tell my children what to do. I'm a bad that way as a professor because I can't tell them what to do. In fact, I'm always at the end of the class where they would do class evaluations, half the class would say, he's always giving his opinions and not listening to ours. And the other half says, he's so wishy-washy. He never comes down with any conclusions of his own. That means I succeeded.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. You're not future, but futures. Appreciate your spending time with us. I'll pass it back on to you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you all.